Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Score Study video series for the 4 Minutes from Midnight Virtual Band project. I'm Yoshio Yamashita. I'm the director of the virtual band, and I'm also the composer of the symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. Today's Score Study video is going to talk about the euphonium and tuba parts for the symphony. Beginning with the one tuba note before rehearsal, letter A. Tubas, this low G before letter A. If you watch the conductor video, I will do a cutoff before that fermata or for that fermata, and then I will cue back in beat 2 of measure number 4. Make sure to watch the conductor video a few times before you record your video in order to familiarize yourself with that. At letter A, you're playing the Dies Irae plain chant, which is part of the subject material that I cover in score study video number 3, which is also on this YouTube channel. So go and check that out if you're interested in me going into a little more depth on that. This forte with accent note is not part of the plain chant, so please make sure you're differentiating between the fortissimo before and after and the forte with accent. This crescendo 3-tied whole notes is also not part of the plain chant. Make sure we're crescendoing that, and it's an abrupt cutoff at letter C. There should be silence there. And then, of course, fortissimo, and then diminuendo to piano, pianissimo. Letter E is the whole Dies Irae plain chant. Make sure you're counting correctly, that the pulse goes from quarter notes at letter D to a half note pulse because we're in cut time at letter E. At letter F, we go back to a quarter note pulse, so make sure you're counting that. Letter G, euphoniums, you have a fanfare type figure. Make sure you're counting because these are 32nd notes, not 16th notes. This is also a motif I discuss in greater detail in score study number 3. And then you have these fivelets. One of the big problems with odd number tuplets, be they 5s, 7s, or 9s, is that we don't subdivide them and subsequently rush through them because we don't know how fast or slow they should be in relation to the beat. We know how fast or slow quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, triplets, and often sextuplets are in relation to the beat. But we don't subdivide 5s, 7s, and 9s properly most of the time and rush through them consequently. The solution to playing these fivelets cleanly and in time is to simply find a word to subdivide with which has 5 syllables. Some suggestions might be the words geophysical or university, and simply using those in the same manner you would 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 4 16th notes, or 1 triplet, 2 triplet, or whatever you use for triplets, or 1 and, 2 and for eighth notes, and simply subdividing those, working with a metronome, and making sure you're playing those in time and evenly. Again, you've got the fanfare before H, which I discuss in score study number 3. The tuba here, you're part of a brass chorale with the trombones and the horns. Make sure you're playing these very legato, but with some separation to them so that we know you're playing rhythms and not just, a dotted half note, a whole note, and a whole note tied to a quarter note. Make sure to count your rest very carefully, euphoniums especially. There are a lot of meter changes here. At letter I, we're playing the Dies Irae plain chant again. However, it's marked pianissimo. Pianissimo does not mean that you should be making no sound. Pianissimo simply means that you should be playing one dynamic softer than pianissimo, but it should still be audible. If we didn't want to hear you play right there, there would be a rest. At letter J is the first long-ish euphonium solo. If you watch the conductor video, you'll see the cutoffs and cues for these entrances. You'll hear a timpani note at bar 89 on beat 1. measure 92 on beat 1, and measure 96 on beat 1. So every time after a fermata, or at letter J in that case, you'll hear a timpani hit on beat 1. And you'll also have a visual reference with the conductor video, so make sure to work with that carefully before recording your video. Also observe these hairpins. You are a soloist, so you do have a little bit of freedom with dynamics, but again, try to respect what's been written. At letter M, euphoniums, make sure you're listening down to the tuba. A lot of what you have is in octaves with the tuba. Tubas, if you can't hit this low C, obviously take it up the octave, but play the low C if you can. Or lower divisi tubas, if you can, play the lower divisi there. Euphoniums and tubas are in octaves leading up to letter N. And please make sure you are decrescendoing down to piano or pianissimo. And this is a gorgeous horn chorale. Tuba, you're providing the bass foundation for that, so make sure you're playing underneath the horns, but still very presently. Letter O is a recap of the same theme we see at letter L and at letter N. I do cover that in more depth in score study video number 4 if you're interested in looking at how that develops throughout the second movement. And then letter P is again a recap of the theme that comes at letter L and letter N and O, except it's in a different key, concert A minor, C major. Tubas, again, if you can't hit this low C, take it up an octave, but I would much prefer if you could play the low C there. The second euphonium solo is a copy and paste from the euphonium solo previous. The fermatas are slightly different lengths, so please pay attention to that when you're watching the conductor video. At letter S, it is an orchestration of the solo theme in the flute that's introduced at letter R. Euphoniums, you'll notice that the descant line you have here is directly derived from the solo you had previously at letter Q and then earlier. Tubas, you are in octaves. Top tuba, make sure you're listening down. And then bottom tuba, make sure you are in tune. I'm going to take this opportunity to remind you all that before you record your videos for the project, you should make sure that you tune your instrument, which is very important. Euphoniums, you continue the descant line to the polka retard, and then crescendo up to around forte, and then you have an additional descant line at the a tempo. Euphoniums in the bar before letter T, this grace note comes before the beat. You have that with the first and third horns. Let's look at that very quickly. If we scroll down here, here's the euphonium line right here. Here is the third horn, and here is the first horn. You all have that grace note together. Make sure it is before the beat. And this high F is on the beat. Again, with this diminuendo to pianissimo at the end, pianissimo does not mean to not play. It simply means very, very quiet. And then tuba, as I address in score study video number 3, right here at letter T, you do have the Dies Irae theme one last time. So make sure that's present. That's why you are marked mezzo piano, decrescendoing down. If you're watching this video in 2 parts, go ahead and pause here and resume when you're ready. Otherwise, we're going to continue on to part 2. Part 2 starts with this run in the euphoniums and then joining the tuba in octaves. Tuba, make sure you hit the sforzando and then back off just a little bit, but still keep the intensity. You will feel like you're playing a wrong note because this chord is a C or a B flat minor over C chord, in which tubas you're playing a low C, which is the bass note underneath a B flat minor chord, which is spelled B flat, D flat, F. Now the crunch there comes from a C against a D flat, the C being the bass note and the D flat being the third of the B flat minor chord. If you've ever gone up to a piano and pressed a C and a D flat at the same time, you'll hear what I'm talking about. It sounds like one of them's a wrong note, and that's precisely the effect that we're going for here. So play that, play it strong, and no, it is not a wrong note. Euphoniums, this dotted 8th, 16th figure should be crisp, articulate, and very marcato. And then, of course, this fortissimo figure at the 6/4 bar should be very articulate, very marcato, and clipped off at the end. The theme at letter B is a mixed meter chorale that's extensively addressed in score study video number 4. The chorale repeats itself a half step higher in concert E flat minor opposed to D minor. At letter C, euphonium and tuba. This is your normal chorale style playing, very soft, very beautiful, legato, and just a very open sound. Letter E is a recap of the theme we saw at letter S in part 1. Euphoniums, you'll see you have another descant line, so soaring above the ensemble and just embellishing the melody that comes out there. If you're interested, I'm not going to play it here to save time. However, the condensed score video is available on the YouTube channel. The condensed score is especially helpful when you're studying your individual part, as it lists which instruments you are playing that particular line with. And that's incredibly helpful when you're listening to the recording and trying to find instruments to play with when you are recording your part. At letter F, this is a low brass chorale. The euphonium and tuba are the two lowest voices. And so euphoniums listen down to the tubas. The tubas, if there is a contrabassoon, I don't believe there's a contrabassoon player currently. Listen down to the contrabassoon in the recording. It is an octave lower than you. And again, play very legato, very connected, but with some separation between the notes so that we can tell you are playing rhythms. At letter G, there will be a piccolo solo at the fermata before G. There will be a timpani hit on the downbeat of G in the 2/4 bar. And then I will cue in the conductor video the 4/4 bar. Again, this is chorale playing. This is the chorale that appears at the very end of the symphony as kind of a grand finale. Except this time it leads us to letter H, which is a copy and paste recap of the beginning of part 2. So I'm going to skip over that because it's all the same material. The top divisi player should play the 1 player note here right before K in the tubas. At letter K, tubas, you're playing a chorale with the trombone section. Euphoniums, you've got a little bit of assistance here right before letter L. And then you come back in at the poco piumoso. At the poco piumoso, please observe the dynamics very carefully. Tubas, you are going from mezzo piano to subito mezzo forte on beat 4, crescendoing up to forte. If you can't hit this low E flat, take it up an octave, but I would very much prefer if all tubas played that low E flat. And then obviously a very strong forte piano going up to forte at letter M. Tuba, notice you don't have fortissimo marked here where euphonium does. That is intentional. Please keep that only to a forte. And then, of course, tubas that can't hit this low C, take it up the octave, although I would much prefer if we could have at least one person play the low C. Notice these dotted quarter notes tied to 16th notes. They're slightly shorter than your average half note, and they are put there very purposely. These need to be marcato and separated, thus the dotted quarter tied to a 16th. This passage in the tubas is to be played very legato, but with separation between the notes, especially since there are some very low notes. Here it is crucial that somebody play the low octave, as there is no other instrument playing that. Letter O is just a very gorgeous horn chorale, which the euphonium gets to join in on, which resolves to major. This is the chorale that appears at letter B, letter C, and letter D previously. This is actually the chorale phrase that appears at letter D. However, instead of resolving to minor, it resolves to major for the first and only time in the symphony, which is evidenced by the C major chord here, C, G, and E. And then letter P is a brass chorale. Tubas, I believe there are only two of you. So the first, the top divisi player, play at the one only. Then the second player comes in bar 150 on beat 4 right here where it says add 1. And then, of course, you can ignore the remainder of the add 1 and the tutti markings. Euphoniums, that's just a tutti entrance, 6 bars before letter Q. At letter Q, euphoniums take the top octave if you can, as marked. If you cannot, play the lower divisi. Tubas, you are the foundation for this entire chorale, so it is important that, number one, you are in time, that you are counting, that every downbeat, every beat 1 is where it's supposed to be, and every beat 3 is where it's supposed to be, and also that you are in tune. Euphoniums, you count out this sextuplet and the 7lit. Make sure that you're putting the right number of notes in the beat, 6 and then 7. Practice slowly with the metronome at first and then work it up to tempo. I suggest just practicing the run on its own and then putting it in context once you've got it worked up to tempo. Euphoniums, the divisi here at R should be a divisi, not just upper divisi if possible. This is a true divisi where we need one player playing the top and one player playing the bottom. Euphonium, please mind the fortissimo and then diminuendo to forte here. That is something that should be observed pretty strictly. Tubas, again, if you cannot play the low Cs that are written here, you can take them an octave higher. However, it's much preferred if somebody plays the low C. And then the last note, you'll notice, is marked with a legato marking as opposed to no marking at all. This is not a stinger on the end of a Sousa march. This is an 8th note that we're going to hold out for its full duration. And though you're marked fortissimo, or in the euphonium's case, forte for this last chord, make sure that you have somewhere to go at the end. Don't play the fortissimo or the forte so loud that you don't have anywhere to go for the fortissimo at the end. And that concludes the analysis of the tuba and euphonium parts for the symphony. I hope this video has been helpful and informational in preparing your parts for recording. If you have questions or comments about this analysis video, you can email us at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. If you have other sections of your part or the full score that you'd like discussed in a future score study video, you can also email us at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.